course of the day, we're going to have a panel discussion at the very beginning, and then there's going to be more informal presentations that's going to really take place. And you can see the agenda just coming up on your screen at the minute. So there's just an intro from me and from S3 Solutions coming up, and that will just last a few minutes. We're going through obviously the housekeeping rules at the moment, and then at 10:10 we're going to go through topic 1, which really is funding in the new normal. That's perked a lot of people's interest, and I've no doubt that's why a lot of people are tuning in this morning. And we have a brilliant panel who are really going to shine light on just how important that is and try to explain, I guess, what it is that you can take away from that that's going to educate everyone moving forward. Then we're going to ask questions throughout that until 11 o'clock. I promise you, you will have to worry that this is going to go on until 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, even 12:15. It will stop at 12. We will run it to time, and this is the forum in which we're going to do that. So at 10:10 to 11, we're going to have that panel discussion. And at 11 o'clock till 11:30, we're going on to topic 2, which is going to be connecting digitally in the new normal. What is the new normal? Well, we're going to try to really examine that. And we've a couple of people who are really going to try and help us along that journey. And at the end of that particular presentation, again, an opportunity to ask questions. So you don't have to wait until the very end to ask your questions. Go to the chat box at the right-hand side of your screen if you have it, and it's the same setup as my own. Well, then please do throw in your questions and we'll try our very best to answer them. Then at 11:30 to 11:55, it's connecting beneficiaries to service and measuring impact in the new normal. And again, that's going to explain a really important concept as we move into this new world post coronavirus and everything that's happening at the minute. So listen, thank you very much indeed for coming. We'll have our closing remarks at 12. And that is just about it, what allows us to really get things going. I didn't introduce myself at the very beginning. My name's Thomas Niblock. I'm a sports presenter here in Northern Ireland, and I was asked to help along today, and really enthused by the amount of people who are actually logging on and I'm showing a real keen interest in this, and S3 Solutions sort of putting it together. So without further ado, S3 Solutions, who are they? We're not going into a big sale, but I guess we have Eamon Sedek, who's from the company here, and Eamon's joining us now. Eamon, just, I suppose this webinar, I'm flabbergasted by the interest, the amount of people who have really connected with this. Why did you bother, and how did it come about?
Thanks, Thomas, and listen, good morning, everyone. Look, you're right, we're overwhelmed with the response to this, and thanks everybody for taking part. Like, I think we've had about 300 registrations from across the UK and Ireland, all shapes and sizes of organisation. But look, for us, for those that don't know us, we're an independent consultancy company, and we're a small team of 15 based here in Belfast, and we work specifically in the community and voluntary sector. And over the course of lockdown, I suppose we've been working with about 200 different community and voluntary organisations, ranging from sports clubs right through to large regional charities. And what we've seen and heard from those organisations, Tom, I suppose a lot of groups have adapted their services. You know, some of the work they're doing, the impact they're having in communities is unbelievable. Others have kind of been sourcing new funds, trying to find new ways of work. Some have taken a real step back and started to reflect on what they're all about and plan ahead for the time beyond COVID. But actually a challenge for many is around actually just keeping the doors open and surviving. So we've heard that loud and clear from them. And I suppose we've been advising them, you know, contact your funders, look at reprofiling your funds, direct them into new services or activities or immediate responses. Like most, we've been encouraging people to connect digitally, you know, use various tools to host committee meetings, public consultations. And we've also encouraged them to retain sort of that impact measurement and record the impact that they're having. And I think for us, like as an organisation that those groups look to for support, we felt that there was an onus on us and a responsibility on us to help that conversation along the way. So that's kind of where the summit had come out of, and the idea for the summit. So we're hoping that it has a lot of value for people this morning.
And what can people expect today?
Well, look, as you said, we're really excited by the panel of speakers that we've got here. The 3 topics that are set out. I mean, we've got Andrew McCracken from the Community Foundation for Northern Ireland, Alison Fraser from National Lottery Community Fund, 2 of the most prominent funders of the community and voluntary sector in Northern Ireland, and to be honest, have been at the forefront of funding COVID-based responses. And we know how highly regarded both funders are in this sector, not only for the funds that they offer, but their approach and how they deal with grantees. So really excited by the contribution that they can make. John McAvoy from Rethink Ireland. We're delighted to have him. We're working with the organisation around evaluation work for their Manon Heron project, and we know they're seen as an innovative funder and pioneer new ideas. I'm really excited to see what John can bring to the panel discussion. And they'll obviously be joined by Simon from AS3, who will bring to the table some of the insights from the groups that we've been supporting, some of the things we've been hearing on the ground and how they may manifest as part of this new normal. You've mentioned Tommy and Will at LogMe and B4B are going to look at how we can connect digitally and use tools, maybe to host public consultations, to organise and host our committee meetings, how to interact as part of those. So maybe using polls, surveys, breakout rooms, and looking at what you really need to make the most of those. And then really excited, last but not least, for Jennifer at Elemental and Kathy from Care Merseyside. Kathy's organisation has underwent a bit of a digital transformation, so they've actually lived this, and I think they've seen some incredible results and outcomes as a result. And Elemental is one of the digital tools that they've used, so it's really a case study approach to look at what digital transformation means and how it can help groups. So we're really excited, such a high calibre of speaker, and we're delighted that they're here.
Yeah, and very briefly, Eamon, this is going to be a reoccurring question, I would imagine, throughout the course of the morning. Have you survived COVID? How's the organisation thrived, floundered, struggled, embraced it? It's a whole lot of things going on.
Yeah, look, like many, we're a small business and we've been impacted by COVID, and we have a brilliant team here, and our priority has been retaining them. But this webinar is a new thing for us. This is, I suppose, part of our community response, and what we've heard loud and clear, and I'm sure people can relate to this. They're zoomed out. They've done loads of Zoom meetings and team meetings, and I think that what's interesting is that people have told us that they don't want to go back to the status quo, and that's where the notion of new normal has come out of. So how can groups sustain digital engagement beyond kind of COVID-19? What does that look like for them? What are the funding priorities? And that's really where the topic of new normal came. So we're here to learn as much as the attendees. We're hoping to get a lot from the speakers. And before we move into the speakers, I suppose for me just to say a massive thank you to Patricia McGee from our team at S3 Solutions, who's worked tirelessly for the last month and a bit to pull this together. She's organised the entire event and gathered all the speakers together, and we really appreciate her work on that. And to everybody here, look, engage, ask questions. We'll do our best to answer today, or else we'll follow up. And just to say, look, enjoy the event, and hope you take a lot of value from it. And again, really appreciate you being here, and thanks for attending.
Yeah, great job, Eamon. For the time being, thank you very much indeed. I should just remind everyone at the top of your screen, you have a different variety of ways to actually view it. You can have view everyone or view who's talking. It's entirely up to yourself, but probably this panel discussion, the view who's talking might actually work a little bit better. So we're going to have 4 guests at the minute. So I'd like to introduce them all to come on and click their webinar screens and their camera microphones to work, please. That would be great. First of all, from the Community Foundation Northern Ireland, we have Chief Executive Andrew McCracken. We have John Avoy, who's the Senior Fund Manager at Rethink Ireland. We have Alison Fraser, who's Senior Head of Funding at the National Lottery Community Fund. And we have Simon Lennon, who's Co-Founder and Operational Director at S3 Solutions. It's a good job I don't do this from a day job, isn't it? Listen, you're all very welcome. Let me come to you first, Simon, because I messed up your intro, so it's only good manners. Listen, tell me a little bit briefly about the organisation. I'm going to go around to everybody here at the very beginning so everyone knows exactly who you are and who you represent.
Yeah, Thomas, as I suppose as you say, I'm the Operations Director here at S3 Solutions, so I'd be leading our team of consultants and advisors alongside Eamon. I suppose contribution wise, I'm sort of looking to reflect some of the input and feedback that we've had from some of our clients. Not all clients, maybe some new people that have become talking to us over the last couple of months and looking support. So we really just want to reflect that, as well as some of the insights from the funders in terms of the experiences they've had and maybe things coming up in the future. So hopefully I can give some feedback and input in terms of what we've been engaging with 150 to 200 organisations over this period. So just sharing that in terms of what they see as their immediate priorities and then what they're looking to for the future.
Okay, Simon, thank you. John Avoy, Senior Fund Manager at Rethink Ireland. For people maybe, John, just not quite familiar with the organisation, could you explain a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks very much. Great to be here. So at Rethink Ireland, where we provide cash grants and business supports to charities and social enterprises across the Republic. And we do that by raising our money through philanthropic sources and corporate partnerships, and then the government matches that money euro for euro. So we were set up in 2013, but came operational about 2015, and since then we've invested around 50 million euro into the sector.
Okay, John, brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Andrew, same question, the Community Foundation of Northern Ireland, for people that are maybe just not quite familiar with,
Sure.
with who you are.
So we're a funder. We support organisations in Northern Ireland only, office in Belfast and Derry, and we connect people who care. We help and funders and others who are trying to give money away, make sure that money really has an impact on the ground.
Okay, we're just losing you a little bit there at the end, Andrew, with your microphone. So I might ask you to click it on and click it off in the best technical terms that we can sometimes with this. So listen, we'll give that another go, but we'll get back to you in a second, Andrew. Thank you very much indeed. Alison Fraser from the National Lottery Community Fund. Alison, everybody knows what the National Lottery is, but nonetheless, I will afford you the same luxury of the same question to everybody else. Just if people aren't quite assured of who you are and what you do, what exactly is it?
Thank you. So the National Lottery Community Fund is the largest community funder in the UK, and we award money that is raised by the national lottery players. So every time you buy a lottery ticket, if you don't win the lottery, you're still helping to support good causes across Northern Ireland. And our belief is really when people are in the lead, communities thrive. And I'll be able to talk just a little bit more about our approach as we go through the questions later on this morning.
Okay, well, Alison, let me kick off with you, because I'd imagine as the largest funder in the UK that people have logged on this morning and they're quite specifically going to think, right, what do I have to do that's going to help us in this new world with the National Lottery in the ether? So what advice, first of all, would you have to those organisations?
Well, I suppose our approach is really very much a conversational approach. So our key bit of advice would really be, if you are thinking of applying to us, or if you're a current grant holder and you're facing challenges in the current crisis, talk to us, because we want to support you if you're an existing grant holder around even repurposing your grant, looking at different timescales for delivery of your project. And if you've got an idea for some funding, then talk to us first before you fill in an application, because we'll be able to support and guide you to make sure your application is as strong as it can be.
And what have people been saying to you, Alison, in this new world that we keep referring it to?
I think it's about flexibility as a funder. That's what they've been looking to us for, and we've been very I think we've been very proactive. We contacted our existing grant holders, and we were able to offer them an increase in their grant if they were experiencing an increase in demand because of COVID, or also repurposing their grant if they needed to adapt it to face the challenges at the moment. So I think it's flexibility is key, and providing that support. And we understand the challenges organisations are facing, so they shouldn't be afraid to pick up the phone. We want to work with them and support them at this time.
Isn't that the big thing, that people, when they see the National Lottery and that funding organisation, they might be afraid to come back, and there's rules and there's regulations and there's a way upon doing things until the middle of March perhaps this year. Are you saying now that you are flexible?
No, we are flexible. I think we've demonstrated that. We've awarded about 2.4 million as increases in grants for our existing grant holders, and we've also worked to make decisions quickly, because we started moving to weekly decision meetings for our Awards for All programme, because we realised that people needed decisions quickly to make sure that the money hit the ground where it was needed. And initially we were seeing a lot of applications, for example, for food. So we had to act very, very quickly and get that money out there. And now we're seeing more applications as organisations enter that recovery phase and looking at how they can adapt their building to make sure it's safe for people to return to. And also more maybe about that digital delivery of their projects.
Yeah, and we'll move on to the digital delivery, because that seems to be one of the big themes at the minute. John, if I can come to you and ask you probably a similar sense, what have been the big challenges over the past 4 months?
So yeah, it's obviously for a lot of our grantees as well that they've a completely new normal, is the phrase we're all using. And I think the challenge that people are facing is that things are so uncertain and that things are changing so quickly. So, for example, when COVID hit first, a lot of our grantees like really were up in the air following lockdown, and then quite quickly, like for a short period at the start of lockdown, they might have felt like that the future of their organisations were in doubt. Whereas then quite quickly, once the government introduced some schemes to support organisations that were struggling throughout COVID, that gave them some breathing space. At least they could keep their employees and stuff in place, and gave them a little bit of a thinking room. So things have been changing really quickly. And just to reiterate what Alison said, the key for us then is constant communication with those awardees to know where people are at. Do they need to repurpose their funding? And how can we support them to get through that difficult time? One of the concerns would have been, I think, for me, was like those earlier stage, very innovative, community projects or social innovations that might have been driven by one or two people. And the big risk was if those one or two people, like if those small projects discontinued, or those one or two people had to go and try and find different work because they couldn't continue, because they couldn't deliver their service because of COVID, then those innovations might be lost, and that would be a huge shame. So I'm thinking in particular around a couple of, environmental projects that I know really well that are really driven by one or two very smart people, and it'd be just such a shame if those projects were discontinued. So we've managed so far to been able to maintain the support and to ensure that those projects will be there once all this quietens down.
Is communication really the key in all this?
I think so. I'd imagine that'll be the message we'll all be sharing, won't you?
We'll try not to repeat too much. That's brilliant, John. Thank you very much indeed. Andrew, let me come back to you. Just from your perspective as a funder in Northern Ireland only, what are the key concerns that you're listening to on the ground, and how are you responding to them?
Sure. I've switched mic. Can you hear me now? All right.
Loud and clear. Loud and
Great.
clear, Andrew.
Okay. So some of the similarities, particularly with what Alison is saying, is I think the first place that funders jumped to that was important was about flexibility. So it was saying, look, unprecedented circumstances, what can we do to make things flexible, easy for people? How can we say to people, listen, stuff that was tied up in a particular project you can use to just keep the doors open? And in a time of uncertainty, that flexibility is really important. And I think that's going to continue to be really important. We're trying to think about how we maintain that, because we're all really uncertain about what the next few months look like, as we have been uncertain about what the last few months looks like. I think a couple of the challenges that we're thinking about, so yeah, there's particular thematic issues. We've all been really appalled by how this has affected older people and care homes, and is there something funders could be doing there? There's issues about how children have been affected by this, and what is there that local organisations can do to support children, both those physical food needs and that digital divide that has become so transparent, hasn't it, in the last few months, that if you've got kids who don't have access to internet and laptops, then they're just going to be completely left behind out of school. And then we I guess see some of those issues about groups who are already really vulnerable or already marginalised, and how the crisis compounds that. So the refugee and asylum seeking community, or the travelling community, or even the LGBT community, I think, have been particularly affected by this crisis. And so we've got an eye on what we could be doing about that. And one of the things that might be interesting is that this crisis has really accelerated amongst funders conversations about power and privilege. So in the world of organizations who give money away, there's a really strong and right backlash that says, hey, you look like you've got all the money, you look like you've got the power, and hey, it seems like a lot of you are white guys who are choosing to decide where the money goes. And this crisis has, across the world and across the UK and even in Northern Ireland, predominantly affected communities who are on the edges of that, the Black community, the ethnic minorities, and how are we acknowledging that involving those communities who are more vulnerable is part of the solution to the problem. So that's one of the issues this has really thrown up and that we're wrestling with.
These are big global themes that have been
Yeah.
hit and rolled up on a snowball and fired at us within the last 3 or 4 months,
Yeah.
so to speak. I mean, these are big themes for any organization, funding, people applying for funding to take on. That can be quite overwhelming, Andrew, I would imagine, for a lot of people listening to this.
Yeah, well, I guess I tell it to you as a bit of, here's a bit what the world looks like in our shoes, and some of the things that we're grappling with. But if I was thinking from the perspective of some of the organizations listening who are thinking about applying funding from us and from the other partners here, I know, well, I'll tell you a wee story. When Eamon and I were chatting about this and preparing for it, one of the things that Eamon said, and I loved it, but I wanted to shout about it too, is, you know, I'd love to do this seminar because it'd be really good to help people get fund ready. You know, that's what this seminar will prepare people for. And I totally understand his intent, and he knows I was going to say this, so it's fine. But as a funder, the idea of people getting fund ready is absolutely terrifying. It's not the way that we want to think. We're not here to be like, oh, we want people to get ready to get their funding applications into us. What we're inspired and motivated by is people in their local communities who are connecting with those who are really in need and are thinking about what the most meaningful way is to have impact in that situation. And if you're doing that, then that is exactly the kind of projects that we as a community foundation, and I'm sure it's true for our partners, want to fund and want to be able to support, and are privileged to be able to support, because we're just the folks sitting in the middle trying to make sure the right people get money. We're not doing the work. And so that's where I'd be steering people to say, okay, yeah, there's lots of these big global issues, but you are the neighborhood, you are at the doorstep, you're able to see what the issues are and what people need. And if you're doing that listening with integrity and making sure that everybody's at the table and distilling that down into here's what the needs are and here's the ideas that we have about how to fix them, then that's exactly the kind of thing that we want to be able to support.
Okay, Simon, just particularly when you listen to Andrew talking there, and you've organizations who are maybe contacting S3 Solutions and sort of maybe looking towards that help and that guidance towards funding, what do you say to that when you hear what Andrew's just said?
Yeah, I suppose, you know, we would say to them, and where we're coming from in terms of that concept of fund ready, is exactly really what Andrew's saying. You know, get you know, speaking to your community, your beneficiaries, your members, your service users, speak within your committee groups, and then sort of begin to document that in evidence, you know, the need for any future intervention, and then break it down into new initiatives, projects. And from there, really, it'll flow any funding applications or any list of priorities in terms of investment in the future. It's interesting that what Andrew's mentioned it as well. I was out with a sort of a meeting recently with a local sports club who wanted to talk to us about funding, and I spent about an hour with them, and there was a lot of questions, and this is often the type of conversation we have. Can you get funding for? Is the start. Can you get funding for? And it's yes, you can get funding for that. But what do you need funding for? You know, what are you trying to do? What is actually going to make a difference for your organization, your communities, your beneficiaries? And even in that meeting, I asked it 4 times, and it was dead silence, you know, in the room. So I suppose for us then, that was a challenge to say, look, we can, you know, there is opportunities out there. There will be funding opportunities, but first of all, you have to really identify what they are and how they're going to make a difference and impact. I think in terms of then where we are and with funding and funders and where things are slightly different, is there may be a period here where the immediate response was really positive, where funders were putting out crisis response sort of funds that were given opportunities for flexibility, allowing groups to divert to different things. And I think that the question will be, how does that flexibility continue into the future? Because really this thing isn't over, you know, and the response to it is going to take an amount of time. And I think in terms of the funder end of things, you know, how normally, I suppose, Thomas, and a lot of people will resonate with this, is that it's difficult to get sort of funds towards maybe the core running costs of your organisation or your management structures and things like that. It's a lot easier to get funding for project specific sort of items, which is fine, you know, and it's understandable. But in the current crisis, you know, really that's where groups are concerned about, you know, how they're going to have the money to keep the doors open, to give them the breathing space and time to plan, to look at new needs. And the other thing is then we're sort of have to consider as well those people in management roles and positions, if they're constantly going to be under pressure for their jobs and survival, or if some of them maybe can't be sustained, it's going to be very difficult for the organisations to chart appropriate plans forward and, you know, in sustainable ways. So I think that's I think the immediate response has been, you know, positive. There's been lots of new initiatives and funds, and I suppose it'd be good to get those continued insights today around how that'll transform into the future, you know, how funders might show flexibility, and even if they are being flexible around certain things, what will they still expect groups to evidence and show, and how they expect them to do that.
I've watched all your body language as Simon was chatting there, and you know, everybody was nodding, almost in acknowledgement of what he was actually saying. But Alison, I suppose with crisis comes opportunity, and some people might think, right, we're in the middle of COVID-19. We've either applied for funding, or we're about to apply for funding, or we are going to, whatever 3 stages you're at there. But then may look upon, right, what are the particular issues we're faced with here, and what opportunities are there around funding that COVID-19 might present? And it's quite a blunt question of sorts, but there'll be a lot of organisations thinking around that. What opportunities are there, if that is the correct word, around funding at the minute in the times that we're living in? Are you on mute, Alison?
Was, yeah, sorry.
I made the same mistake, but I'm glad somebody else did.
From a National Funding Community Fund perspective, I think the message is really we are open for business as usual. We've got a team, you know, that have been working remotely from home from the 17th of March, and it really is, our funding programmes remain open. So we've got Awards for All, which is small grants of up to £10,000, and then our People in Communities and our Empowering Young People programmes, which are grants of up to £500,000, and they're really about providing that evidence that we've talked about earlier about people in the lead. And from a funds perspective, what we mean by that is that you have consulted with people in that community, that they have identified that this is the project that they need and want, and that they're involved in identifying that, delivering it and developing it, and you're accountable to that community throughout the lifetime of the project. So we still would like that consultation to happen, because that's what the fund is about funding those types of projects. And I think some of the conversations later this morning about how you do that engagement in a more digital environment when face-to-face isn't appropriate will hopefully be helpful. People may also be aware that we've been working with different government departments, so it's not just lottery money that we give out, but we've also been working with government departments. So we were working with the Department of Finance around the Dormant Accounts Fund. And that had been meant to launch in June of this year, but obviously whenever the crisis took place, that was put on hold. But we held a public consultation at the end of 2019, and there's details of that are on our website if people would like to look at that. Whenever the pandemic hit, we then worked with the Department for Communities to deliver the the COVID-19 Charities Fund. So that has been a priority for us, but we are committed to going back to the Dormant Accounts Fund and getting that programme launched later in this year. That programme will support the sector to adapt and recover from the pandemic and build longer lasting resilience. So that's something to watch out for. So if you want to follow us on Facebook or Twitter or look at our website, further details of that programme will be evolving. And also as a fund, we are going to be doing some consultation on our programmes for the future. We're reviewing our current funding portfolio, so come the autumn time, we'll be doing some consultation. Would really welcome people's feedback about the different funding programmes and what they think we should be supporting them with.
You mentioned there reviewing your current funding portfolio. I would imagine a lot of people's ears have picked up with that. What are the conversations that you're having at the minute?
We haven't really started them yet, but I suppose our strategic framework is about people in the lead, so that theme is going to stay. But I think it's a discussion about whether you have open programs, like people in communities, which you would feel be a very open program, wouldn't be very, it's really about what the community needs. We fund all different types of projects, but there's also the option of having more thematic programs that maybe focus on a specific theme. And that would be an option that we could look at, but we want to consult with people and ask them, is that what they're looking for from us as a funder? What do they need and want?
And could you give us an example of that theme? I don't mean to pressure and anything else, but I suppose, listen, we are very early days in COVID. And one of the main things is that people have looked at digitally connecting. My mum's talking about Zoom and Microsoft Teams. I never thought I'd be having that conversation with my own mother, but therein we have it. So, and these are remarkably changed days. And I guess that even in these early months of COVID-19, what are you hearing about community projects, community organizations identifying this is something that would be really useful in this new world that we're living in? Could you give us a couple of examples of maybe what the lottery are looking towards now is right, that actually may help, or it mightn't have necessarily have looked upon it with the same light before?
Well, it really is up for people to identify what they need to deliver their project, but we are seeing more applications around that digital delivery. So where previously delivery might have been around face-to-face, applications are now including the digital delivery, maybe training of their staff team, so that, who maybe aren't familiar with how they can best do that and keep that engagement going. But we're also being flexible around how projects are delivered. The timescales may need to change. And looking at buildings and how buildings can be repurposed so that people can enter them safely, so they can continue to have that face-to-face conversations. And I suppose mental health is something that we're hearing a lot about in terms of projects looking to support people in terms of mental health and the impact that the pandemic has had on them.
John, if I could ask Rethink Ireland, again, what are people saying to you? What are these new, if not new, but certainly there's an added focus on these different areas where people are applying for funding, certainly seeking advice that maybe you guys are looking towards with a fresh lens in this new world?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we all know, the last 6 months has changed the world, and I suppose we were positioned nicely to be part of the response of the government in the Republic, and we're currently distributing an Innovate Together fund. We're in the second call of that is open right now, and that was 5 million targeted specifically at responses to the crisis. Now, not just the short-term immediate health crisis, but like new solutions to social issues that need to remain like in the medium term. And like move to digital delivery is the key part of that, but not the only part of that. So yeah, it really is, I suppose, from an innovation perspective, it's like been a spark that lots of organizations who've had ideas, who are thinking about moving online a little bit more, they've just had to do it very, very quickly, and we're trying to support that in a constructive way. I think one of the things that I've noticed considerably is the great value for money at the minute from a funder's perspective, like, because people are really trying to do their best. That organizations out there who have a purpose in supporting different disadvantaged groups or groups of beneficiaries, they're really keeping them at the heart of everything they do, because they can see the groups that have been left behind and that are getting even more marginalized. And I think it's an amazing sector, that there are so many leaders and groups out there who are willing to go that extra mile to make sure that those people aren't left behind. And I think it's that kind of collective innovation is going to be, like, when we look back in a few years' time, it will be one of the biggest positives that has come out of this crisis.
Yeah. If you can narrow it down to three, John, 3 areas that you think that a lot of people now are applying for funding, looking for funding, that it's maybe slightly changed, and I'm putting you on the spot by asking you that, but could you give me one of them is obviously going to be digitally.
Sorry, I just had a bad line for a second.
Yeah, just if you could narrow it down to 3, John, maybe 3 areas where people are now looking towards funding that maybe necessarily wouldn't have been top of the list, so to speak, 4 months ago. And I feel unfair putting you, throwing this down on you, but if there's 3, I'm assuming digitally will be one of them.
Digitally is one of them, but I think that that is across like all the different funds that are open. There's a few areas that would be more specific. So one of them is remote working and employability opportunities, like in a completely different, I suppose, employment landscape. And I think there's a particular risk in there where, like, it's the lower paid workers get left behind, because it's quite reasonable to expect, executives or managerial level workers or tech workers to be able to work at home at their computer, but that's obviously not the case for everybody. Secondly, I think education has took a huge kind of disruption at the moment, and I mean there's a lot of expectations that education will return to something like our previous normal in September, when terms are meant to reopen, and we don't really know that if that's going to be the case. So I think there's a big drive to move online, or at least for all kind of educational solutions to have a blended opportunity, which can be really complicated if you start thinking about younger kids or secondary school kids, and how that's going to work, while maintaining social distancing. So I think there's some really innovative solutions needed in that case. And then I think thirdly, I think if the COVID crisis hadn't hit right now, we'd still be all talking about the crisis of both crises of Brexit and of climate justice, which we've almost forgotten about, unbelievably. And they're still there. Those crises are still there, and particularly I think the climate justice crisis that's upon us. With all the innovation that's going on right now, I think we've opportunities to ensure whatever new solutions are put in place, do more than take just the climate emergency into account, but they help in that area as well.
Okay, folks, if I just ask everybody that's listening, feel free to add your questions. I can see some of them coming through at the minute. We are going to put some of those questions to the people on the panel in just a moment. So listen, if you have it in your head, throw it in, and we'll try to get through as many of them as possible. Andrew, just on a similar theme, if there are 2 or 3 areas that maybe people are looking at now and thinking, right, well, this is an area of funding application or funding concern, or people sort of thinking, right, this is now a priority, which perhaps it wasn't at the very beginning of 2020. What are those areas and those potential opportunities for organizations to maybe look towards?
I think Alison and John have picked up the big ones. Maybe the one other big one that occurs to me that I know many organizations have experience of is gender-based domestic violence, which seems to have been a factor of lockdown, that it's escalated in those domestic situations, the possibility of domestic violence. So that's another kind of quite central one that I think all funders are interested in trying to work out what they can do about. And then I'm interested in, there's some areas that are probably slightly more edge cases, but that someone and that we'd be keen to pick up on. So I think there's something about how we as communities deal with grief and have dealt with grief over the last few months, and what we need to do about that over the next few months. And next week we're opening a few funds, including a small one that's about that. So where we've all experienced loss and death in completely different ways over the last few months. And that's bound to have left behind some real impacts on us, and what could we be doing differently, or what could communities be coming together to do over the next few months that would help with that. So it's an edge case, but an important one, I think, for us to deal with. I completely agree with John about the return to school, and if we're in a situation where we're expecting parents to be picking up more at home, then what is there that we in local communities can do to come around that, to help to support? And we're really interested in seeing what ideas people have for projects that can then supplement at home what isn't happening at school. So I know for at least one of my kids, they're talking about in 2 days a week, in 3 days a week, rota come September at school. And so we're thinking, well, what are we going to do with them for the other few days a week? And who have the ideas about what extra support people can provide for that? So those would be a couple of extra ones I'd throw in on top of that.
Has COVID-19, as devastating as it is and has been, Has this been the biggest juggernaut to really hit that funding industry, so to speak, and almost cause, if not a complete rethink, but certainly a broadening of the horizons?
You asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking.
It's that, well, it would be hard to think of any industry or sector of society that hasn't completely been turned on its head. For funders, it absolutely has been transformational. It's pushed us on those issues about flexibility. It's pushed us on those issues about power and privilege. And then we've just dealt with all the same struggles that everybody's dealing with. So funders are trying to work out how to educate their kids and what they do when they barge into the back of the room and as a meeting, and how, particularly for my staff who have caring responsibilities of all sorts, living and working in this way has been a challenge. And then it's maybe not the huge, big strategic thing that you're looking for, but I wonder if it echoes with other people. My observation with my team, who are fantastic, is relationships are harder when you're working like this, and therefore if you're leading the organization or helping that, I spend more of my time connecting people and resolving little conflicts and miscommunications that have come up. And that's a change. There's a change to ways of working, and more time needs to be put into making relationships work well. And the other thing that we really miss and are really looking for how to crack, and like this conference is a good idea, but also shows a bit of the gap. So much of our work comes out of the informal spaces. So the conversation over coffee at the back of a conference where someone says, oh yeah, we just had this idea that we were thinking about, and you get to go, that's a brilliant idea, you should really get on that. Or for us, the conversation with a potential donor who we meet in an event, all those informal bits of relationship building, we're really missing, and really thinking about where you can create space to enable them to happen, because they're a lot of those in-between spaces are where a lot of the work happens.
Is that a danger? I'm glancing to the right-hand side of my screen, Andrew. It's some of the questions coming in, but one of them's come in from Fergal, and you've touched upon it there, where he has suggested, are we almost too quick to move to this, not a digital world, but look at the form in which we're connecting here at the minute, that you're losing that personal touch? And then that brings up a whole host of questions. For example, and to be frank, if you don't have a lot of money, you perhaps don't have broadband at home, perhaps you don't have the highest speed broadband at home, of which try to do a Zoom meeting or a webinar meeting with a dodgy broadband. I mean, it's incredibly difficult. And again, it shines a light on those areas which seem unjust.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that as a whole society, that's a challenge that we've got to face into. That language digital divide is exactly what Fergal's talking about. And that there's a challenge there in that kind of funder to grantee relationship, where how do we make sure that potential grantees who don't have digital capacity end up off the edge? And for us, doing something like this is one way to help with that. And we have some staff who we can employ to go out and physically talk to people face to face. But it's also a challenge for the kind of grantee to beneficiary relationship too, isn't it? That you want everybody in the community to be able to access your services, and how do you do that if they can't tune in? And that's one of the conversations that's happened a lot over the last few months. Has been friends of mine, particularly kind of private sectory, not more commercial people, saying, oh, I really got a bit more time, I'm furloughed, thinking about how I could volunteer and do something. And there's actually been a wave of people across the islands saying, oh, I can volunteer, how can I help? Much more than the NHS or big institutional organizations have been able to absorb. And I think what we need to do is to mobilize that desire to help and make sure it's really, really local. That we're saying to people, okay, going in and rewriting a marketing strategy for this organization might not be the thing that you should do at the moment, but on your street, You know the little old man who's too proud to ask for help, but who might be struggling. And you have that knowledge, and there's only a few people on your street who have that knowledge. How do we make sure that you're using that knowledge to make sure that the people who are most vulnerable, whoever they are actually getting the help? So I think that question of how we bridge that divide that Fergal's talking about involves a whole spectrum of us using all the knowledge and relationships that we have.
Okay, we've only a few minutes left, so I want to get through as many questions as possible, folks, if I may. And a lot of the questions coming in are a similar theme. We've one here from Kieran coming in. Are funders thinking about supporting families impacted by alcohol and other drug use, particularly with the evidence of increased home drinking during COVID-19? So we also have, what are the known ways to help marginalised groups in terms of both funding in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland? And is there any study of pieces of evidence is there any study or pieces of evidence presented by those seeking financial help during COVID-19 lockdown? And a lot of these questions coming in are, are funders, this is coming again in, are funders thinking about supporting families impacted by alcohol? So that's two we've had in that sense. And a lot of the questions are quite similar. There are funders doing this? Are funders looking at this? Rather than get you to go through each individual question, Alison, I suppose if I can come back to you, if someone has a question, think, are funders thinking about this? What is their first step and what's their best? Is it just to contact a funder like yourself and say, is this something you're working around?
Yeah, I mean, we really would like to have conversations with people so that they don't spend a lot of time maybe working up something that isn't something that we would be able to fund. So it's much better just to kind of pick up the phone, have a conversation, and we will be able to support and guide you in terms of which of our funding programs might be most suitable and different areas that you would need to look at to make your application as strong as possible. And we, as I said earlier, people in communities and empowering young people, they are really broad programs. It's up to people to identify what they need. So we will be funding projects, and have recently made awards that will support the impact of alcohol on families, the issues around domestic violence and mental health. So it is about having that consultation with the community about what they want and need, and then developing a project around that to support them.
And we have another question coming in here, Alison, as well, about a particular person whose charity is based in London, where it seems to be the move is not necessarily away from the larger charities, but certainly an added focus on some of the community, smaller organisations. And I guess the question they're going to have is, is that going to have a detrimental effect or impact on their potential in gaining funding?
Well, I mean, in the team that I am, we're funding projects that are operating in Northern Ireland, but they could be delivered by organisations that have a headquarters elsewhere in the UK. But it is all about that local buy-in. So if that's what needs to be demonstrated, and that's what needs to exist for us to be able to consider us funding that's key, that there has to be that local buy-in. It's just not organisations sort of parachuting into different communities and thinking they know what the community needs. It's about the community having the evidence that this is what they want and need, and being accountable to that community for what's being delivered.
Okay, and John, we have another question coming in here from, I think it's from Peter. Are funding organisations represented here prioritising vulnerable groups, and if so, to what extent?
Yeah, so I can speak for our own organisation anyway, and so just to be aware to a lot of the people listening or watching, we can only fund activities in the Republic. But we just the other day opened a new fund called the Equality Fund, so it's got a specific focus on disadvantaged groups and particularly marginalised groups, and it's a new big initiative relative to our own size that's just open at the moment. So if anybody is interested, you can check that out on our website. And our two funds are the Innovate Together Fund and that fund. The Innovate Together is focused on COVID responses, and the Equality Fund kind of speaks for itself. But I would echo exactly what Alison said about, one of the big learnings we've had over the last period of time is that, because projects and project leads are doing so much hard work, the time they have to invest into funding applications is even more limited than before. So like finding out that your idea is not suitable for a fund is a really important piece of information, and you need to get that information as soon as possible. So we have loads, I'm sure all the other funders do too, like I think for some of the open funds, we might be able to fund between 15 and 20% of the applicants, and that's a very high number. You know, compared sometimes it's down to 8 or 10%. So that means for every 10 people who apply, 9 people are unsuccessful. You know, so really they need to kind of manage their time and energy suitably, because you can't be successful unless you put in like lots of time and energy, because it's competitive. So needing to know which opportunities to go for is really important, and maybe the best way to do that is to reach out and make a phone call before you start any of the work.
Yeah. Andrea, if I could just briefly bring you in, another question coming in: will funders simply include specific provision? And some of these questions are quite direct, to meet technology poverty. And that is whatever technology poverty means. It means different things to different people, but we've a vast grasp of what that actually means. That seems to be a big topic area around people looking towards funding. So is that specifically going to be looked at?
Yes, absolutely. That's so we currently we've been doing emergency funding up until a couple of weeks ago. We've just opened a new needs fund, which is a more generic fund, and addressing that digital divide is absolutely one of the priorities for it. We'll be launching some specific funds on child digital poverty next week or the week after. So it's absolutely on our radar. But as I'm sure everyone realizes, funders are thinking, well, what's going to be a cost-efficient way of us doing this? And for very vulnerable groups who don't have access to a laptop or a tablet, it might be an application for specific laptops or tablets. But we're always looking for more innovative approaches that are more cost-efficient, like there's schemes where community groups are helping local libraries use the tablets and stuff that they have get out to the community, which obviously gives you more bang for your buck in the terms of access to equipment than if you're buying laptops for people. So it will be, you know, this has really raised that issue of people's access to technology and the need for that. What I think funders will be looking for is the most innovative, cost-efficient, thoughtful ways about how we can do that don't end up burning lots of money on laptops that will be out of date in a couple of years.
Yeah. Simon, if I could bring you in, there's a lot of questions coming in and examining a lot of themes, and we're not going to get through every single question here today, although we invite everybody to continue to send them in. But would you be able to sort of get back to some people on those questions and maybe sort of give a little bit of guidance?
Well, I think the good thing, I think where the questions are coming from, Thomas, is the contributions from everyone in terms of their funders are open for business, that they're grappling with the same type of issues that groups are, that they're thinking about the same type of issues in terms of sustainability, how they can support groups to keep going, but also how they can sort of adapt so that groups with new ideas and new projects can come to them, you know, and have a chance of securing investment. I think John's point there in terms of, you know, obviously getting as much information as possible at the start about your possible funding option. Don't go down a road. I suppose big advice would be, it's great to have questions and queries, but don't panic and start doing things outside of your core remit. You know, speak to your members, your group, the capacity of what they've got, and speak to the community that you serve. I think the other thing is it's great. I'm sure people will take a lot of heart from the fact that I think Alison mentioned the likes of the dormant accounts, that it's still in process and coming down the line, and hopefully that will be a focus on helping groups sort of work towards sustainability, work towards planning and kicking on for the future. I think that sort of gives a marker to a lot of groups to say now's the time to sort of to get that work done. But I suppose everybody will probably say, you know, I think from our end of things, when we talk to groups, you know, there's a willingness to adapt and do things differently. They need investment to do that, but as well, if you're an organization, you know, you're not going to get funding to keep doing what you've always done. You know, you do need to come with new ideas of how things are going to look in the future. So I think in terms of our end of things, of course, any questions that we get in and contributions that we can go back to people, we will. I think it's great that there is lots of questions, lots of can you get funding for this, that, and the other. And I think the core themes coming back here funders are open for business. Do your sort of groundwork, consult with people, get your evidence base, and then come forward with those different ideas. And I think, I suppose what they're saying is pick up the phone too. Don't feel like there's a wall between you as a potential grant holder or grantee and the actual funder themselves. So engage.
Okay, engage, probably the key word. Listen, we're going to move on to our next stage. Alison, John, Andrew, thank you very much indeed for spending the morning with us. That's been really, really helpful and really, really informative. So listen, we really, really appreciate that. And also Simon as well, thanks very much for giving us that bit of guidance around that. So the people that have asked questions, we haven't got them around, engage with the funders, engage with S3 Solutions, and we'll try our best to get a more informative answer. But the key question probably the key thing is do engage, and let's try our best around that. So listen, folks, thank you very much.